Hi, Eric.
Hi, how's it going, Aaron?
I'm fantastic. I got released.
I know. I accidentally tricked you into telling me that like 4 days ahead of time on
I know.
on our last recording.
It's kind of interesting how, like, your calling, like, when you get released from your calling, like, you're not supposed to tell anybody. It's like
It is an interesting
a big
taboo.
surprise.
Yeah.
I don't know why that is the case. But yeah, I got
I
released.
don't think that's in the DNC.
It's not in the DNC.
Yeah,
it's
pretty
kind of
sure.
this thing where people all like to get this. I think it's the surprise factor. People just like to hear, oh, we got released. All at
Well,
one
let me
time.
ask you this, Aaron.
Yeah.
Did you find out the sex of your babies before they were born?
That's a good question. We did. Yeah.
Okay, well,
yeah.
then
we honestly
then
clearly
you don't really
care
believe
about
in surprise.
Clearly, we don't care about surprises. So I got released from my calling. Now I want.
Wait, remind everyone what your calling is.
So
Maybe they didn't listen to the last episode.
That's
because
right.
It started with a 0.
That's true. It
who
did
does
start with
that?
a 0. Who goes in that order? So I was finance clerk here in the Berkeley ward for 7 years.
It's a long time.
7 years as finance clerk, and I have to say it was an awesome calling. So, what's a calling?
Oh, that's a fun question.
Yeah.
I guess I would define calling. If somebody unfamiliar with faith asks me what's a calling, I would say it is a position you are asked to fill.
That's right. So, it's volunteer, right?
Well, it's sort of volunteer, right?
Yeah.
Like you are allowed to say no.
Yeah.
Although how comfortable you are saying no varies a lot from person to person.
Yeah.
And in rare occasions, you do actually literally volunteer and say, hey, I'll do this calling. But generally speaking, you're asked to do it. And then the volunteering comes when you get baptized.
You kind of call them, that's right. That's right. You kind of volunteer to do these things. So calling in the church, I was the clerk for a long time. And we're going to be talking about money today in the church, which is a super interesting topic. Before we got there, though, I just wanted to say how much I enjoyed being a finance clerk. All right? So I've had lots of callings in the church, a variety from all kinds, from teacher of little kids to, whatever, all kinds of different things.
Sure.
This calling is the only calling that I'm going to walk away from, like, I really feel like I got it. Right,
you figured it out.
I figured it out, right? So I just got called to something else. I'm going to be working with, like, in the elders quorum, doing various things and whatever. But I know I'm going to try really hard. Like I'm gonna do my best.
No one's doubting you. Right?
But it's so nebulous, right?
Sure.
How many callings have you walked away from just thinking, you know what? All the people who I was responsible for, I did the very best to make sure.
And the auditor said so.
That's right. But in the finance one, at the end of the day, I could close the file cabinet, lock it, and walk out the door and thinking, you know what, that's it. It's great. I got graded, right? I got graded by an auditor, and he said whether or not I did this right or this right, and I was able to fix it. Whereas if you're like elders quorum president or a Sunday school teacher, there's no grades.
No,
there's no idea that you got it right.
And one of the frustrating things is, you could always have done an additional.
Yeah.
You could have, donated another minute to the cause.
Yeah, there's always, I could have got that extra 5%, right? Or something like that. Maybe but anyway, but not with finance clerk. That's great. The second thing that I really liked about it was I got to work with my hands, right? There's something really satisfying about moving little pieces of paper around. That was kind of my experience, right? I had the same experience when I was in grad school. Now I'm a computer programmer, but when I was in grad school, I used to grow crystals in these little trays, and they were beautiful. And at the end of the day, I could look in the microscope and I could see this is something I made with my hands. And so this is one of the few callings I have had where I got to work with my hands. At the end of the day, I had physically done something to this environment that I was in.
Do you have any feelings about the fact that all that work is going to get shredded?
No, I think that's kind of great. Yes, we only keep 3 years of documents, and every year we shred it all. It's kind of its own circle of life, I suppose.
Yes, that's right.
So while I was a finance clerk, I got, I think, a real interesting insight into how the church moves money around. And I thought that would be fun to talk about. Because, surprising to me, a lot of people want to know what the church does with its money. What are your thoughts when it comes to, like, church and money?
Money is something that I am dispositionally disinclined to think about.
Well, you're a teacher, right?
I'm a school teacher, and so that works two ways. One, it's good I don't think too much about money because I went into the wrong career if I wanted to make money.
There ain't much of it.
But I also think that one of the reasons I went into teaching is because I think that being poor is safer than being rich in terms of I have less to think about in terms of money. Sure, I might worry about feeding my family, but I don't have to grapple with the questions of whether I'm using my money righteously or destroying my soul with it.
Yeah, that's great. It's interesting, though. I have seen this kind of an attitude, this anti-rich attitude, often expressed. You didn't just express it, but I've seen it in other members of the church where, like, I'm glad that I don't have this money because, well, maybe it is just what you said. I don't agree. What I'm trying to say is I don't agree with this philosophy.
Yeah, I don't know that I do either. I think it's a laziness on my part.
Yeah.
I think it's spiritual laziness.
I think that I think that money itself is not inherently good or evil, of course, but
Sure.
but if you have more of it, right, then theoretically you can do more good with it.
Theoretically, yes. Although I think some people use that as an excuse to, dive into mammon.
Yeah, well, I certainly buy a lot of Magic cards and Switch games with my. But anyway, yeah. So I think that it is there. I have seen this attitude before from lots of members of the church, where the kind of anti-rich attitude.
Well, on the other side of that coin, and I haven't run into this as much, but I've run into many people who complain about this as being common, is the attitude, sort of the gospel of prosperity, where if you are rich, you're clearly more righteous. And one could make the argument that this must be true if one looks at the average net worth of our general authorities. Many of them were in rich-making careers.
That's right.
There's a sister in our ward who is currently furloughed from the federal government.
Oh, no.
But her job is to take down multi-million-dollar scams, and disproportionately the number of people she takes down are really nice white guys fulfilling their callings in Utah.
Really?
Mormon guys.
Okay, so there are plenty of us that are...
And those are people who, she gave an example last time I was speaking with her about a guy who, when they confiscated his planner, on some days you would see all this evil taking place as he's scamming grandmothers out of their last penny, and on the next page you would see where he's making plans to teach the deacons on Sunday because he's the young men's president. He's really devoted to that calling and wants to do right, but somehow he could separate those two things, and money, no matter how you get money, is fine. As long as, because that's different. Making money is different from righteousness. You wouldn't have all this money if you weren't righteous.
Yeah. Boy, that's kind of pernicious.
Yeah, it troubles me, and I think part of my attitude comes from a fear that might be me, that I might be easily addicted to money.
Well, it is good to pick careers where you think you can do the most good in the world.
I think there's something to that.
Yeah, this is something I tell my kids, right, is that, whatever it is you end up doing, try to find something that really helps.
Although I do think that speaking of vistas, like how far I could see, one of the reasons I'm a high school teacher is because I thought I could do a lot of good. But, I'm never going to do anything directly. I'll never do anything directly about something like global warming or plastics in the ocean or desperate poverty, right? So
it's interesting. I've heard that argument before, but you're raising kids, right? Maybe they'll do something about it.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's just indirect.
Yeah,
I can't directly say that I have done something about, this vicious civil war in a third world country. That's the kind of good that I have directly remove myself from, because I don't want anything to do with money.
Well, regarding your other point, it doesn't really surprise me that there are a disproportionate amount of white dudes that are scamming people out of their money. I mean, that's kind of what we see. Okay, anyway. Let's go ahead and talk a bit about the other topic.
Let's get more positive, yeah.
Let's get more positive. So we talked about the leadership of the church and how much money they have. Because of all...
Not that there aren't exceptions. In the Quorum of the 12, we have some teachers, for instance.
Yeah, right.
Or we did. Are they all dead now?
I don't know.
They might all be dead, depending on what you call it, how you qualify teacher.
Let's think about how the money actually gets spent in the church, right?
Sure.
Nobody really knows, because the church is very closed about its books, except in the UK, where they're required to disclose all their information.
And it used to be true, I'm told, and our records in the ward library only go back to 1989, so I'm not sure, but I'm told that it used to be that during General Conference they give a much more detailed explanation of where the money goes.
That's cool.
In a more UK sort of way.
But the general consensus is that most of the money gets spent on buildings and maintenance.
I've heard that a lot. I've heard that's why we have 2-hour church, so we don't have to build as many buildings.
Ah, okay. Well, that makes sense. In the 50s and 60s, there was an apostle, and his name was Henry Moyle, right? And he actually,
Moyle, yeah.
Do you know about Moyle?
I know a little bit about him.
Elder Moyle, I should say.
Elder. Emeritus.
Elder Emeritus Moyle. His reason, and there's a great Wikipedia article here called "Finances of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints."
Oh, nice.
It's very comprehensive. All right.
I love Wikipedia.
Yeah, Wikipedia is great, and one of the things it talks about is that he spent a lot of money on buildings. His reasoning was that you would get more bigger buildings, you get more converts, right? And eventually the church just said, okay, we've got to slow this down.
So it might be his reason for things like the Interstate Center here in Oakland.
Maybe, yeah. It actually hits really home to me because my grandpa was a construction worker, and he was one of these building missionaries, as they used to call them, and he would go from state to state and move around. Like my mom was in a lot of different high schools because kind of like military almost. But building buildings all the way around the country.
Do you want a fun...
In the 50s and 60s.
It's not actually an unfun, swear word free J. Golden Kimball story?
Okay, sure. Those are fun.
Yeah,
Those
it's
are
actually
hard to find.
not even a story, but his name is on the records of the people who helped build this church. He came here and made a little bit of money helping build this church.
The one here in Berkeley.
The one that we're sitting in right now.
Yeah,
which is the Berkeley Ward building.
Which is a gorgeous building. It really is nice. So yeah, the church spends most of its money on buildings and maintenance, right? The rest of the money goes towards things that you'd expect, like education and social welfare and things like that. I'm going to talk about that here in a minute. But what about the members? Who actually gets paid? That's what's interesting. Because if you could criticize anything, some people are kind of annoyed that we don't know where the money goes because of a closed church. Do you feel that way?
I'm not that annoyed by it, but I do think we would be more in keeping with the spirit of the revelations published in the Doctrine and Covenants if we had much more explicit and publicly available accounting to the membership of the church.
Okay.
As I read the Doctrine and Covenants, that's what we're supposed to do. So I worry we're out of compliance with the Lord, but it doesn't bother me that much because money. I don't like it.
Yeah, and right. And also I'm not really sure I'm in agreement either. The auditing is pretty explicit and very clear in terms of how the money is spent here at the local level.
Sure, I don't doubt that.
So let's go from the bottom up. I was never paid as a finance clerk, right?
Right.
You teach seminary, you're not paid for that.
No, but some people are taught.
Some people do teach. So this is one of the branches where you can get paid in the church, and that is as a teacher.
Right.
You can go into the institute classes or go into education, right?
Right.
The general church bureaucracy does exist, and they are paid.
Right.
The bishops are not paid.
No.
Stake presidents, which is the local leadership of the church here, they're not paid either.
Right.
Right? If you go on a mission for the church, you're not paid.
No, you pay.
In fact, you pay. It's the opposite. Temple presidents?
I don't believe so.
I don't believe so either. So my point is that most of the members are volunteer. Most of the spiritual stuff, the lay clergy, right?
Right.
Totally unpaid. And then you get to the
Salt Lake level.
The Salt Lake level, right? Where you have people and they receive what they refer to as like a modest stipend.
Well, you would say that no matter how much it was.
Yeah. Here's the interesting thing about this.
Yeah.
As you said, a lot of them really were doing great.
Right.
Right? And our president even was a heart surgeon, right?
You make money doing that.
Yeah, I guarantee you whatever he's making now, it's not heart surgeon money.
No. That would be surprising.
Then he had to quit his job to go and become... So to me, this is one of the... To me, I just disagree with this assertion that the church isn't transparent about its money. I think that... if you just add it all up, it's just... There's nothing to worry about here.
I changed my mind about the money thing around the time I learned that mission presidents are sometimes paid, and the reason's because I realized that one of the things that worries me about the church is sort of an arguable homogeneity in top leadership in terms of experience. Mm-hmm. But if they will sometimes pay someone who worked in a less lucrative career, then you can have people who did things other than law and business and medicine as general authorities. And so I think that in terms of diversity in leadership, the stipend thing is a good thing. If we believe that we want to have multiple experiences contributing at the leadership level, then we have to have more than just lawyers and CEOs.
That's great. Yeah, I agree with you completely. So first of all, that's one reason why it doesn't bother me. The other reason I think people are they want more transparency is because they're shifting their feelings that you would have towards a company that you had invested in onto the church. So let me tell
Wait,
you
explain. Yeah, explain that better.
So if you buy stock in a company, right, and you, for example, Apple, right, then you've heard, then you have, and then you feel like you own a piece of it.
Well, you do,
right? You do own a piece.
That's the theory. That's the metaphor, if you prefer.
So, and you will get paid based on what you did, right?
Unless it's certain tech stocks.
Unless it's a tech stock, right? And you can even you can pay attention to board meetings, and you have a right to know how your money is being spent, right?
Right.
When I don't feel that way about tithing, about church money. When I give money to the church, it's a gift.
Yeah.
That's honestly how I feel about it.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Do with it whatever you want.
I think feeling like I need additional voting rights depending on how much tithing I'm paying.
Yeah,
I think that's a dark road.
Yeah, it's just not a thing. So I thought that was an interesting topic because, the other thing that people talk about when they talk about church and money is how much there is, right? So do you recall...
We're presuming.
Yeah, we're presuming, right? And we have some numbers here. Do you recall Mormons Inc?
Yes, and I was thinking about it. That book's got to be 20 years old this year, if I remember correctly.
Well, it was originally a Time article.
Right, the Time article. I don't know if I'm dating this by the Time article or by the book.
We have a picture of it right here. We can put this in the link. This is an article by Common Consent, right? It's by Sam Brunson, and it's an article called LDS Inc. And he has a link here, and he has a picture of the Mormons Inc. Time article. Has a picture of the Salt Lake Temple on it, and it's called Mormons Inc.
Yes, I remember that article.
I remember when it came out.
Everyone was talking about it.
Everybody was talking about it, which to me was great because I was a Mormon and I loved it when people talked about Mormons.
Yes, and it wasn't. I wouldn't call it positive or negative. It was just
this is
facts.
Where the money is. So in the article they said that the church was worth $30 billion, right? And then after the article came out, they said the church, I think there was some response that said it was fairly exaggerated, right?
From the church?
Yeah, from the church.
That sounds right.
And but nowadays, and it's been 20 years later, that is about what people think the church is worth, if you count up all the land.
Yes, we're one of the biggest landholders in the U.S.
Right, but the land doesn't do much of anything.
Cows.
It's actually kind of yes, it's worth a lot. There is a big ranch farm. Yeah, there's and fruit.
Fruits,
right? Yeah. But the land that the church sits on is, it's worth a lot. But this doesn't make them any money, right? It's not appreciating. I mean, maybe if they sold it, it could be different,
I understand what you're saying.
All they're really doing is just building buildings on it. Right, here you go. The assets. Time magazine estimated the church had $30 billion. Yeah, the revenues are estimated to be $5 billion with assets of $25 to $30 billion. Is that a lot of money?
It's compared to what?
That's what I'm asking.
I would say it's a lot of money.
Okay, to me,
it's
a lot of money.
By any reasonable standards, it's a lot of money. There might be places with much more money, but there's no standard by which $30 billion is not a lot of money. That is a reasonable standard.
So I've been watching a lot of The West Wing.
Ah, okay.
So I've been thinking a lot about government money and stuff like that, right? Compared to like the state of California or anything that actually happens in the world, I don't actually think it's that much money.
Major governments, sure.
Mm-hmm. How does the church actually use it? So like we said, they spend a lot of money. Where does it come from first?
Well, I saw you had a list there. Mm-hmm. But I do think the most interesting source is tithing. Just because of the sacred nature of tithing, as we learn from the New Testament, for instance. Tithing is special compared to other monies, I would say. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what percentage of the church's income is tithing, because I don't know exactly how the various money-making businesses owned by the church, I don't know how much they bring in. But
I'd estimate it like at 70%, maybe even 80%.
The businesses?
No, I'm sorry.
Tithing.
Yeah.
Tithing.
Most of the money, I think, comes from tithing. Yeah, I agree with you that it is kind of, it's really interesting about tithing. So we pay 10% in the church, right, which is a lot. I served my mission in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro, and we brought, as we taught the people about the church, one of the things we had to do was to teach them about tithing, right?
Sure.
Right, so if you join the church, you're going to be paying 10% of your income,
yes.
Right?
Increase.
And of your increase.
People get stuck on those two words.
Yeah.
Anyway, go ahead.
You know that it was never an issue, not even once.
Really?
And 100% of the people that I worked with, they're like, oh, yeah, that's about right.
Interesting.
I think that people have this intrinsic sense of value. They enter the church and they look around and they see what's happening and they're like, yeah, this is worth about 10% of what I got.
Okay.
That was my experience.
What was the average income of the people you taught? Would you estimate?
Oh, this was in the 90s, right? Late 90s. So this would have been, I don't know, 500 a month maybe.
Okay.
US.
Mm-hmm.
Probably a lot of them had made less than that. And there were some that made quite a bit more. But yeah, it was interesting. That never came out. I think generally actually people say, yeah, this seems about worth it. If I'm going to be a member of this church, my experience is that people recognize the value of it.
That's an interesting way to put it, and reasonable.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of it comes from tithing. Some of it comes from fast offerings. Okay, this is one of the most interesting and revealing parts about being a finance clerk in the church. Was I got to see where the fast offering money went.
Yes.
Okay. Now, of course, I can't talk about it in explicit detail.
Wouldn't want you to.
Okay. But, the church pays for a lot of food, which I know is obvious. I mean, when we talk about fast offerings, so for fast offerings I'm gesturing to the microphone whenever we diverge to talk about stuff that is obviously just Mormon.
Definitional.
Fast offerings are once a month we skip 2 meals, we fast, and we take the money that we saved and we donate it to the poor.
And we are encouraged to interpret the money we saved in the most generous way possible.
Yeah, so fast offerings are used.
Half a box of cold cereal and some, and then again for lunch. It's not.
That's great. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I never really knew, right? But I gotta say, as the clerk, I got to see it. The money from fast offerings went through my hands and fed people. Like, I saw it.
Right.
It was really interesting in a way that was visceral. Like, okay, we pay for counseling, right? For rent, for electricity, It was awesome to see that. Does any of that surprise you?
No. What I think is interesting about fast offering money is, as I understand it, once branded fast offering, it doesn't become anything else. It's for the care of the poor. And maybe that will be in our ward, maybe that will be in Sierra Leone, but somewhere in the world.
It actually is spent here first.
Right, here first. Anything extra
gets siphoned away off to other
right.
groups.
Which I believe we were in the black and more for all 7 of your years, weren't we?
I actually didn't keep track of that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. The church really did used to be in debt, though.
Right.
Yeah.
Famously in the Lorenzo Snow days.
That's right. So I looked this up because I didn't know much about it. Have you ever, what can you tell me about the Edmund-Hillary Act?
Oh, okay, let's see. You just read about it, so we'll see if I'm right.
Mm-hmm.
The Edmund-Hillary Act is the act that, I don't know if I guess polygamy would have already been illegal, but it was the law that would have seized the church's assets for engaging in polygamy, including all the real estate and so forth. Is that the right one?
Yes, you're on the right.
Okay.
You're on the right. It's horrifying. So this was a government act.
Yes,
that was
by government, you're talking the feds.
By the feds. Okay,
Congress.
This was before Utah was a state, right?
Yes.
This was 1887.
Wait,
right?
is that before it was a state? When did Utah become a state? It was in the 90s, I think.
1890s, I think. All right, it passed the Senate by a vote of 38-7. Because, there weren't that many states back then.
Not as many senators those days.
It did all kinds of things. It disincorporated the church.
Oh, yes.
Okay? So
you just don't exist anymore.
You are not a church anymore. Why is the church a corporation? This is stealing again from the Common Consent article. Why is the church a corporation?
I don't know.
It's so the church can own land.
Is that true?
Yeah, that's what I understand.
Okay.
Yeah. It's so that the church can, and so that it can pass on. Otherwise, a person owns the land, and then there's weird inheritance stuff.
Right, but luckily a corporation is a person that can never die.
And that's exactly right. That is the reason why. It's important that
Has the church been baptized? If the church is a corporation are people, then doesn't the church need to be baptized?
Who does that? Proxy.
It would have to be done by proxy.
Yeah, it would have
But
to
does that mean we can't do it until the church is dead?
Some other company.
Oh my gosh.
Well, during this time we could have done it because
There's a great speculative theological story here.
So it required an anti-polygamy oath for prospective voters, right? It annulled territorial laws allowing illegitimate children to inherit. This is just a weird thing.
Illegitimate children meaning children of
Probably
the second wife.
Children of polygamists, right? It abrogated the common law spousal privilege it disenfranchised women.
Oh yes, I did know that. That was a big one because
we had given
Utah
women the vote
in
1870.
The territory had given women the right to vote, and
right.
The funny thing is, you would think that if polygamy was so terrible for women, and I know I'm simplifying this. Yeah. Read Laura Thatcher Ulrich's new book if you want to know more about polygamy. But if it were so bad for women, then the federal government should really want women voting. Right?
Yeah,
they should. If women were so opposed to polygamy, they should want the women to vote.
It's weird. This law seems just totally cobbled together of all kinds of weird things. And of course, one of the things is that it did was took money away. It was then upheld 3 years later, okay, in an act called the Late Corporation of the.
Apparently, it's not an act. This is a Supreme Court case.
Yeah, this is a Supreme Court case by the Late Corporation of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Speaking of dead churches.
So I hope they baptized it in 1890, and then when it was resurrected,
That's right.
It was already baptized.
The United States, right?
Yes.
And all that stuff was upheld. And then they started confiscating money. They took $381,000 in assets. All right, the U.S. Attorney for Utah Territory.
It's a lot of money in $1890.
I can tell you how much money it was. It was $10.5 million.
That's a lot of money.
Right? And then there was a financial crisis, and the church was borrowing money to try and buy these mills, and they went heavily into debt. And by the time President Snow became president, like in 1900, or they were $2.3 million in debt at that point, which is $70 million.
And it's worth pointing out that because John Taylor had spent the last years of his presidency in hiding, etc., I imagine that the church had a bit of a leadership void that led to a lot of things like the tithing issue that I assume we're headed towards.
Yeah, that's what happened. So President Snow started saying, hey, guys, pay your tithing. And the church got itself out of debt by, I think it says 1907.
That's pretty good. And
hasn't been in any kind of debt since. In fact, here's a great story about the Great Depression. And this is about the Wall Street crash of 1929 and how it relates to a bank in Utah called Zions Bank Corporation. Right? So I'm just going to read this from Wikipedia here. And it says, on the morning of February 15th, 1932, 3 years after the crash, okay, customers began a run on the bank, waiting in lines that ran out of the building and onto the street. Tellers were instructed to honor all the withdrawal requests.
Oh.
All of them. In 2.5 days, a total of $1.5 million was withdrawn. And near the end of the second day, President Heber J. Grant, right, placed a sign on the bank's window that said, in part, the bank is in very strong, clean, liquid condition. It can pay off every depositor in full. Fear of its failure is not only without foundation, but positively foolish. There's not a safer bank in the state or the nation.
I really like President Grant. I don't know if we would have gotten along personally, but I would have loved to be around him when he said things.
The line started to go down. Many people returned their money, and by the end, their deposits were more than their withdrawals.
Wow.
So I think that was really cool. I think this whole experience of going into debt and nearly not making it, really the church has been. They don't spend. They don't live in a deficit, right?
It's like people who grew up in the Depression.
It's like people who grew up in the Depression.
Yeah,
right?
Still there.
The church is still as it was. It does not. It spends less than it takes in, right? And it saves some of that. There are all these silos full of grain and all that kind of thing. Is it good to not have a deficit in the church?
I think it's always good not to have a deficit. Although I think it's worth pointing out before somebody comments below that the church does use debt as a financial tool. I mean, I remember President Hinckley mentioning that in General Conference once, how the church used debt as recommended by its financial planners, but it's never a debt that exceeds. It's just a way of leveraging. I don't understand money, Aaron.
It certainly is leveraging.
It's
something.
a tool. It's a financial tool, and it's called debt.
I recently learned something about usury. Have you heard of usury?
Oh, yeah, I didn't know it was pronounced that way, but sure.
Well, how would you pronounce it?
Usury.
Okay, sure.
But I know words from reading books because I'm a nerd, so who knows?
So, if you go to a bank and you want to borrow money from a house,
right?
All right. Say the house costs $500,000 because it's
a nice round number,
right?
And
right.
You got lucky.
So you go to yes, right? You got lucky, really lucky. So it's out like somewhere terrible.
Yes.
So you go to the bank, and the bank gives you $500,000. Where did that money come from?
Actually, they don't give you. They give it to the other person.
Yeah,
right.
They buy the house.
You never
for
see the money at all.
You never see the money. But the $500,000.
Where did the money come from? Is the
where does it
question.
come from?
From everybody else's money.
That's incorrect.
Is that not true? That's what I learned from It's a Wonderful Life, Aaron.
They create it out of nothing.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They
Oh,
write
great.
a check for $500,000 using money that doesn't exist.
See, this is the thing about money is we're all accepting it on faith.
Yeah.
It's
It's a concept called leverage, and if you go back, and there's a wonderful YouTube video called "Money as Debt" that's really worth watching about this. And they create the money out of nothing, and then by the time the money all gets paid back, it's as if an extra $500,000 entered into the world and was used by people, because you pay them $500,000.
Right.
They're still. It's literally they created $500,000 out of nothing. The leverage is the ratio of how much money they actually have from depositors to how much money they can create, right? And it used to be like 1-to-1, and then it went up to like 1-in-5 or 1-in-7, and now it's like 1-in-90. The amount of money that they can create.
Money is terrible.
And because of that, they can charge interest, and charging interest is usury or usury.
Right.
And that used to get you killed.
It did. It's illegal according to the Old Testament.
Yeah. We should have mentioned the church does have like 10% of its income coming from these private investments. But from my understanding, that came from the surplus. Like they took some of the surplus and they invested it.
Yeah.
And so that's why they own this cattle ranch and everything like that.
Well, I think a lot of those things are owned also. It came out of the welfare program. It was providing food for people, and then it just grew.
So there were two main issues then. One was the transparency in the church, and the other was the quantity of the money. Personally, I don't think they're issues.
Well, let's talk about spending. I brought one story,
Mm-hmm.
and it's one that troubles a friend of mine.
Mm-hmm.
He is a director of motion pictures,
Mm-hmm.
and a few times he's tried to make films with the church. The church does finance film in some specific ways. Of course, there are the movies made by the church for church purposes.
Yeah.
The church also owns Excel Entertainment, which is a film distribution company, and distributes films, but does not fund them. That's the policy.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, anyway, I'm not an expert. I don't want to say things that aren't true. That's sufficient information. And it's frustrating because the church won't pay for these movies, but it will help distribute them once they exist. In comparison, take BYU TV, which is church-owned television,
Mm-hmm.
and they.
I don't ever know anything about BYU TV.
Well, your kids don't watch Studio C.
It. Okay, so I do watch Studio C, right? Is that BYU TV?
That's BYU TV.
Okay.
So that's paid for by the church, and they do use tithing money with that. And BYU TV is high-quality television at this point, and they are like a lot of television where they will pay for something expensive and then kill it and decide not to air it. And that's happened a few times. And so my friend is frustrated by this because he sees BYU TV spending a lot of money without expecting any results, whereas the movie side, they won't pay to fund things and they only pay to distribute them. And even in that case, the church has to feel that there's going to be a good return on investment. And if you know anything about the movie business, like there's never a guarantee on investment. Mm-hmm. And so his frustration is the church is spending tithing money on television and sometimes without an expectation of return. Just like it's good quality programming. Kids who watch Studio C will get baptized someday, maybe. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know if that's the philosophy of it. But movies are treated differently. And what bothers him, of course, is that he wants to do film with the church.
Well, he wants a piece of the action.
Right. But also it bothers him that tithing money, like if tithing money was being wasted on me, that's one thing. But tithing money being wasted on other people when they won't waste it on me, that's upsetting. From a human perspective, yeah.
I don't know, man. So here's what I think.
Yes.
I think that the church has a certain number of expenses it needs to make.
Right.
Right.
Electricity.
It needs to fund this kind of service opportunities. Right.
What do you mean by this kind of service opportunities?
Sorry, I gestured towards the poor, apparently.
Oh, okay. Hey, poor. How's it going?
Sorry about that. Oh, man. That's just...
Go on.
But okay, so if they have a certain liability that they have to cover, and then once they cover it, they have this surplus, right?
Yes.
What are you going to do with that surplus? So in investment strategy, you're supposed to split your investments into 3 categories.
Okay.
Safe, moderate, and risky.
Sure.
And the longer your life goes on, you vary the percentages.
Right.
But so if you have this surplus, you're going to invest it in the same way. You're going to invest it in safe, moderate, and risky things. And because it's your responsibility,
Right.
in the same way that
I don't necessarily disagree with that. It's just philosophically, it's tithing money, right? It's the widow's mite, and so it feels different from regular money.
But what about the parable of the talents?
Also fair, right? I'm not saying there are easy answers to these questions.
So let's make sure I'm not speaking in tongues.
Okay.
Right? So in the parable of the talents, right, you had the Lord gave some money to this person and they invested it and made some money back.
Right.
More money to this person, and then the last
Doubled their
person
money, in fact.
doubled their money.
Fine
right?
investing.
Yeah. The last person buried it, right? Because they didn't want to lose it, right?
Right.
And the Lord was mad at that last person.
I would like to know what happened to the 4th guy who was lent a talent and lost it when he tried to invest it. That guy's not even didn't make the parable.
Well, it's interesting because this is kind of the whole prosperity doctrine, right? That you were describing earlier.
Yes,
right?
Potentially.
Yeah.
If you choose to look at it that way.
No, but that's not the point of the parable. The point of the parable was
No.
that it didn't matter how much you were given; it's what you did with it, right?
Right.
So I think, first of all, it'd be irresponsible for the church not to do something with the surplus.
I don't disagree with that.
Right. Now we can. So once we've made that statement, we can argue about whether or not paying for BYU TV is a good use of that money.
Right. Well, that's where a greater transparency would make people feel more comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, if I knew the church lost, I don't know, so let's say a couple $1 million a year on BYU TV, just to pick numbers that I have no idea of their accuracy. Would I feel better about that number if I saw that they were pulling in 100 times that through safer investments? Or, and I guess really what it comes down to is it important that I feel comfortable with it?
First of all,
should I just take this on faith?
I think you should think. I think that it does make sense to take. I mean, even though we talked in the last episode about how we said in last episode we were going to use logic and reason.
We did say that.
Okay, so let's use some here. Okay, yes, you should take it on faith. The church is going to do the best you can with its money. All right, we've said that. What is? Let's use financial reason here. For one thing, it is marketing. Right?
Sure.
Right? It isn't really lost money. Advertising isn't really lost money.
And now those Studio C sketches will exist on the internet forever.
You joked about how it wasn't, it was going to be like maybe they're going to get converts or something like that. But it's not too far off the truth. That video of that guy that got hit in the face a lot.
Yes.
Right?
Scott Sterling.
Scott Sterling, right?
Everyone in my class.
Darned if everybody
knows
hasn't seen that, right? And
right.
The fact that it's a BYU thing is, what's BYU? Oh, it's the Mormons. Advertising is all about impressions.
Right.
Right? Even though you've heard of Coca-Cola all over, they still advertise in the Super Bowl.
Yep. Don't want you to forget about them.
And another reasoning about it could be that, it's just people, right? At the end of the day, they've been given some money. They're going to try and. I mean, I'm sure they have the same kind of funding procedures that we have in science, where you do your best to argue and maybe you convince somebody.